Maybe I should do a one-off on that.
That would be really interesting.
Because even in the Hebrew Bible, Ezekiel and Daniel, it's used differently.
Okay.
So
sometimes it means like a heavenly exalted figure, sometimes it just means a human being.
yeah,
It's really quite confusing.
and it's really hard to tell. There's no.
Which may be why Jesus used it, because he didn't want to be boxed in by
That's for sure. There you go.
is the name he most often refers to himself as the Son of Man. Okay, thank you. Here we are again, plowing through the Psalms.
Yeah.
And this particular session is on the Psalms or the Psalms of Zion. And the question has already been raised, what is Zion? Anyway, we hear Zion scattered through the both Old and New Testaments. It's used in a variety of different ways, as the Son of Man is. It's used as referring to the city of Jerusalem, Zion. It's used sometimes as a particular part of the city of Jerusalem, not the whole city, but a particular section of the city. Sometimes it's used for the people who live in the city, Zionists or Zion, people of Zion. Sometimes it's used as the entire people of God, referred to as Zion. But most often, and the way we will see it most often used here in the Psalms I'm going to look at today, it's the city of Jerusalem itself, or a part of that city. The Hebrew root of the word Zion can mean a number of things. It can mean to be dry or in a dry place, but scholars, it's possible because it's dry over there everywhere. But scholars think for such an exalted holy place as Jerusalem, that's probably not the root word that is being referred to. There's another possible Hebrew root that means hilltop or mountain or even fortress. And so it's probably that Hebrew word that is being referred to when we hear the translation Zion. When it refers just to a part of the city of the old city now, or the city of Jerusalem within the walls, it probably refers to a hill that is just southeast of inner city Jerusalem, and it's the area that David originally conquered when he conquered this city, and it was called the city of David, this particular portion that he conquered. Zion can also mean Yahweh's seat or throne, so it has a variety of meanings, but originally it referred to this specific hill, Mount Zion, this hill in and around the city of Jerusalem. What eventually became known as the city of David was an ancient city that was probably developed originally in the 4th century BCE, we say these days, before the Common Era. It's an ancient city. David conquered it sometime around 1000 BCE when he was at his zenith. And he conquered the city from the Jebusites. There was a tribe that had taken possession of that old city at that point. Since that time, over the history, it's been destroyed completely at least twice. Once in 587 BC by the Babylonians, leads to the Babylonian captivity when the Jews were taken off into captivity. It was rebuilt, and it was destroyed again completely by the Romans in 70 AD, or 70 CE, Common Era. It's been under siege, we believe, about 23 times. It's been captured and recaptured 44 times. The city of peace, right? Jerusalem, Shalom, city of peace. Never has it been the city of peace, except in the minds and hearts of the people who loved it, which we're going to hear about in these Psalms today. Slide, please. This is a picture I took on sabbatical of the Damascus Gate, which is on the eastern side of the current Old City. It's called the Old City of Jerusalem because, as you know, Jerusalem today is it's a metropolitan city. It's a modern city, but the Old City, where the original Mount Zion was, is here. And the original, of course, has long since been destroyed, but the present walls, the walls you see there were built in 1538 by Suleiman the Magnificent during the Ottoman Empire. They were in possession of the holy sites at that point, and so they rebuilt these walls that you see here. You can walk around top of those. This Damascus gate is on the eastern side, and so if you walk out of this gate, like there's people that are going in, you can't quite see. If you walk out of this gate and keep walking, in a couple of miles you'll enter into East Jerusalem, which is the Palestinian, predominantly Palestinian section today. It's where our cathedral is located. St. George's Anglican Cathedral is there, and affixed to that, abutted to that, is St. George's College, which is a kind of a graduate school of studies for all kinds of things. I did my sabbatical there in the 90s, and so you can just walk a mile or two west and you'll run into this Damascus gate. Second slide. Hard to see this too, but the Western Wall, or the Wailing Wall, we're all familiar with from seeing things on television when presidents go there, or popes, or whomever, and are given the opportunity to go up and put a little slip of paper into the cracks of the wall. Devout Jews do that. They're constantly in front of this wall, rabbis, Orthodox rabbis doing their vows and prayers, a very sacred place for them. It's only part of the old, or the second temple that is still around, and it's actually just a retaining wall that bolstered it up on the hill, and so it's not really part of the temple itself, except it is. I mean, it's a retaining wall. It's the only thing that's left from the various destructions that took place. Nonetheless, they feel like that's a very holy and sacred place, as you might gather. Wailing Wall is a little bit disparaging. It's the Western Wall, but wailing because people go there to offer their laments and their prayers of hope and desire for peace in the world and in the Middle East. So that's Zion, that's Jerusalem, and that's what these psalms are going to be singing about and lifting up in praise. Won't say anything really about how it's used in the New Testament, except I'll just file it by title. This is, of course, from the Psalms, so we won't look at the New Testament usage. It's referenced 5 times in the New Testament, just quoting an Old Testament passage. And it's once in Hebrews, it refers to the city of the living God, Zion, the city of the living God. It's a heavenly kind of vision. In Revelation, it's Mount Zion where the Lamb is standing, and the final judgment. Salvation in the last days comes from Mount Zion. It always felt like it would happen back in this holy city whenever it did happen, the final coming, the final sorting happened there. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about this particular city. And I want to look at a psalm that is not technically probably a song of Zion, but it introduces the genre. Look at Psalm 137, and whatever translation you have, I'm going to read it. It doesn't matter which translation today. We're not going to read things in unison. We're going to read them individually, and so you can follow along in whatever translation you have. Psalm 137. This is maybe the only psalm which can be really reliably dated. It was composed in Babylon during the exile in 537 to 539 BC, shortly thereafter. Likely it was composed by a Levitical priest. And so I'm going to read it to you. Psalm 137. Here they are in captivity now. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willow there we hung our lyres, for there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem, how they said, raise it down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, you devastator, happy shall he be who requites you for what you've done to us. Happy shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock.
We never read those last two verses.
You know, often, when it is listed in the lectionary, I don't think it probably ever is on Sundays, I don't know, but in the daily office, it brackets those last two verses so you don't have to read them. They're hard to hear, aren't they? I mean, they're awful. Try to remember what we talked about under the laments. So it's not an excusing, but maybe an explanation. These are oppressed people whose entire lives have been destroyed by Babylonians, who see perhaps no hope of ever getting back to it, but are ready to fight, are ready to go to war, if necessary, to once again reclaim this beautiful city that they love so much and their temple rebuild. And so, you know, it's that fury that we talked about under the laments that we sometimes just need to acknowledge. We've sometimes felt, damn him, her. We've sometimes felt like maybe it'd be okay if somebody checked out. If we've been that hurt by someone or that damaged. Now, again, doesn't excuse it. We're taught to forgive our enemies. We're taught to rise above this kind of ire. But let's not doubt the fact that it exists. It exists within our own breasts. It exists in the world. And this also says something to us about the kind of savagery of warfare, and ancient warfare particularly. I mean, they did destroy everything, you know, cattle, children, women. It didn't make any difference. It was a savage kind of warfare. They wipe out the entire culture if they could. It happened to the Jews did it to others. The Jews did it ascribing God as having told them to do it. I don't believe that. I believe that was their desire, projected upon God, but nonetheless, clearly this kind of thing happened and still happens. You know, the children die in Ukraine. Children will be dying in Ukraine for decades if they step on landmines and all the rest of it. Warfare is awful, and children and even infants die sometimes. So it's the reality of the way these folks were feeling, and also something we should avoid at all costs.
One of the
Comments
about this is that the verse 7, remember what the Edomites did. It's not the Babylonians here. The psalmist is complaining about the Edomites. And who are the Edomites? The descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother. So it's these relatives, and what they did, they're the ones saying, damn it, they're the ones that are being, that this implication is happening to, not so much, although I'm sure the Babylonians are part of that, but
sure.
they're the daughter of Babylon, you know, they're kind of, so just this filial thing that shows its way up, shows up all sorts of ways through the scripture.
Sure. So if we can, in our minds, bracket those last awful verses, think about the beauty of the earlier verses in this psalm. They were in Babylon and they sit down by the waters and weep because of their pain of loss. They can't even sing the songs of Zion, which we're going to look at, because it's too painful for them. They hung their guitars up on the tree, their lyres up on the tree, because they just couldn't even think about bringing those hymns of praise to their lips, because they were so far away from it. And yet their captors taunt them, you know, yeah, sing us. We heard you had these great songs about Zion. Sing us some of these songs. How can we do that in our foreign land? It's simply impossible. But if I forget you, O Jerusalem, even in the midst of this trauma, let my right hand wither, so I'm useless. Let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. Don't even let me be able to speak or to sing if I forget you. If I do not still set Jerusalem, even in captivity, above my highest joy.
It's amazing that Boney M. by the rivers of that and they even say, may the words of from my lips and so on, like we were talking about last week, that's in their song.
Sure.
And Mike just showed it to me this morning. I went, oh, I've always sung that song, but I don't know what words I sang, but I didn't know I was singing those songs. And suddenly, it's amazing that
It's right there.
it's a famous song.
Yeah, exactly.
By the rivers of Babylon, it's actually that psalm.
I have a question.
Other comments on this song?
So they don't want to sing because they're grieving. And yet, singing it. So then the psalmist says, if I forget you, O Jerusalem. So I find that interesting because if they're going to sing, that will help them to remember.
Yeah, and perhaps it's singing for their captors that they don't want to do. In entertainment, they're not into that. Perhaps they sung them in their own, certainly in their own hearts and minds, maybe in their own gatherings if they were able to do that. But they didn't want to. They didn't stand up in front of their captors and be mocked by singing of a city that is now a rebel.
Well, and maybe they're worried about feeling disloyal to the pain by expressing joy. That's pretty common.
Okay, I want to look at Psalm 48. A number of psalms, but they're all fairly short, and each have a. Now, this is really a classic song of Zion, a hymn of praise, idealizing and praising Jerusalem. So this is a classic example. Somebody read it. I don't care who. Just read it. We will follow in our own translations. Maybe some of the differences will raise a question.
The Lord is great and worthy of our praise in the city of our God upon his holy hill. Fair and lofty, the joy of the whole earth is Zion's hill, like the farthest reaches of the north, the hill of the great king's city. In her palaces, God is known for a tower of strength. See how the kings all gather around her, marching on in company. They are struck with amazement when they see her. They are filled with alarm and panic. They are seized with trembling. They toss in pain like a woman in labor, like the ships of Tarshish when an east wind wrecks them. All we had heard, we saw with our own eyes in the city of the Lord of hosts, in the city of our God, the city which God plants firm forevermore. O God, we reenact the story of thy true love within thy temple. The praises thy name deserves, O Lord, is heard. The praise, singular, thy name, O Lord, is heard at earth's farthest bounds. Thy hand is charged with justice, and the hill of Zion rejoices. Judah's daughter cities exult in thy judgments. Make the round of Zion in procession, count the number of her towers. Take good note of her ramparts, pass her palaces in review, that you may tell generations yet to come, such is their God, our God forever and ever. He shall be our guide eternally.
That's simply lovely. I mean, that is just a song of devotion and love to this holy city. We said we don't know really what these superscriptions are above them, but this is called a song of praise to the sons of Korah. Korah were singers, and they were descended from Moses' cousin, Korah. So it could be an ancient psalm, if that's what happened. Certainly it's a psalm, I would guess, that is written before the fall of Jerusalem, because listen to how they exalt it as a fortress. It's not going to be destroyed. It's going to be a fortress where God is going to protect them. God's going to be present. Kings are going to fall, in their faces in front of this fortress. So it must have been a time when David or his descendants or whomever were in power, and the world bowed down to them to some degree. They had some authority. They had some leadership in the nations around them. But it is certainly a song of great love.
I got a question. Okay, he's talking about in verse 11 here, Let the towns of Judah rejoice because of your judgments. Okay, so we're talking about Judah and not Israel. Is it all about Judah, the southern kingdom? I'm just curious, because I know
That's where it's
split up.
located. Jerusalem is in the southern kingdom.
Yes, so meanwhile, Israel has already been conquered, I think, and then now it's Judah that's in exile, but they're singing about Judah and Jerusalem.
Right. Depends on when the psalm was written as whether Israel was destroyed or not. We don't really know.
Okay.
But certainly they are singing about Judah because that's the territory in which
I see.
they're located.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And just to your point, I mean, yeah, the kingdom of Israel was sort of gone,
Yeah.
in the early or the late 8th century, and by Assyria. But even past that, you see in those later writers this go back and forth between talking about all of Israel and the references to the people that stem from Israel and Jacob and all his children. But Judah is that what then became the country. It was Judah as opposed to Israel. But even if you think about, there are places in the New Testament where Paul will say, "Oh, people of Israel,"
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're not talking about that ancient country. They're talking about all of those descendants
Descendants of
of
Jacob.
Israel.
I
Okay.
see, very interesting. Thank you.
Was the belief at this period of time that God was to be found only here, only in this holy city?
Interesting.
In that?
The way I sort of imagined that they understood this, and clearly they were monotheists, they believed only in one God, they believed in the God of the whole universe. It's sort of like our understanding of the presence of Christ in the sacrament, that there is a sense of the presence of Jesus Christ in the bread and the wine, and yet we know that Christ is greater than that. And I think the Jews had a sense of the presence of God in this holy place like that was a particular locus in time and space where they could encounter this God. But I don't think they believed that he lived there like I live in my condo. I think they had a more lofty view of God than that. But the tent of meeting anciently was seen as that same sort of place where there was such a strong presence of God. Maybe it's like a thin place that the Celts talk about, that there are certain places in life where, in the world, where you just feel closer to God somehow. Maybe it's on a mountaintop, maybe it's in a sanctuary of a very holy place. Somehow it's just easier to communicate with God, to almost sense yourself in the presence of God in that place, even though intellectually God is everywhere and God is much bigger.
Some scholars would sort of go where you were going, in the sense that God is located here. Jerusalem's the navel of the universe. Everything came out of Jerusalem, right? And then the Babylonian captivity came along.
Yeah,
And then they had to figure out how to deal with this elsewhere. And so some of these scholars would say, at that point, Judaism became portable. It wasn't, you weren't necessarily, you didn't have to have everything be in Jerusalem. As long as you had the Torah, you could take it with you. And it was located more in the Torah than in any place.
Right. And recognize that all these writings and our reflections upon them span centuries and centuries of human development. There are strands in the Bible where clearly God is seen as very much in one place. You can see God. He walks in the garden. You've got that sense of kind of primitive understanding of God. In fact, even in Judaism, a monotheistic religion, there were other gods out there. This was just our God. This was Yahweh. But they didn't deny the fact that sometimes in their history that there were other gods out there that we might have to deal with. But clearly they were responding to the one God that they believed. Gradually, as human theology develops, our reflection on God develops, the sense that, having multiple gods is really a messy system. Look at Greek gods, and goddesses are always fighting each other and making mischief on earth, and somebody else has to straighten it out. It's really not a very healthy system, polytheism. And the gradual understanding understanding as sort of progressive revelation and progressive theology happens, major religions of the world, even some of the Eastern religions, I think, we say there's really this one ultimate God, and some of these other things may be manifestations of God, but monotheism is really, I think, concerning Jews, Muslims, and Christians, the understanding that there is only one.
In support of your hypothesis that we think of divinity being located in a particular place, whether it's in the sacrament on the altar, whether it's in the community that celebrates that, and so on. Verses 9 and 10 just strike a chord. O God, we reenact the story of thy true love within thy temple.
Mm-hmm.
What did we just do half an hour ago
Exactly.
over there? And so, it's located there, but then the very next verse says, the praise thy name deserves, O God, is heard at the earth's farthest bounds. So it's cut loose. I mean,
Mhm.
it's both locally ubiquitous.
Exactly. Jerusalem, of course, is still much beloved by the three major religions, certainly, and many others. Elie Wiesel, who's a Jewish scholar and author, Holocaust survivor, wrote a book called A Beggar in Jerusalem. It's a novel, and this is a quote from it. Jerusalem, the face visible yet hidden, the sap and blood of all that makes us live or renounce life, the spark flashing in the darkness, the murmur rustling through shouts of happiness and joy, a name, a secret, for the exiled, a prayer, for all others, a promise. Jerusalem, 17 times destroyed yet never erased, the symbol of survival. Jerusalem, city which miraculously transforms man into pilgrim. No one can enter it and go away unchanged. Now, I must testify that there is a truth in that. I've been there several times, and the first time I went there, I don't think I've ever been the same since, and I certainly felt this sense of coming home. I'd never been there before, but of course we'd had, from this high, we've had Bible stories about Jerusalem, we've seen depictions of it, and so even for us who are not Jews, there is a sense of homecoming when you're there in that place, and although you may not walk exactly where Jesus walked, if you're on a pilgrimage, you're in the area, you're breathing the same air, you're in the same environment. There is really a holiness about it, I think that belies all understanding, and Elie Wiesel makes that pretty clear in this statement. He says 17 times destroyed. He's probably referring to times when it was, nearly destroyed and built back or whatever. But the major destructions are the two that we referred to already. All right, I got two more things I want to do and take a little bit of time, so I'm going to skip over Psalm 76 and we're going to look at Psalm 84. Why don't you, somebody who has a prayer book, read Psalm 84 for us out loud. We can follow it in any translation. And then I'm going to pass out a sheet of paper that has this same psalm set to a metrical setting. We're going to sing it. It's a hymn setting. And I want to do it sort of back to back without discussion, but in between, so you can, first of all, hear the words of the psalm itself, and then how this poet has transformed it, transfigured it into a hymn. So read Psalm 84 from a prayer book.
How dear to me is your dwelling, O Lord of hosts. My soul has a desire and longing for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh rejoice in the living God. The sparrow has found her a house, and swallow a nest where she may lay her young, by the side of your altars, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. Happy are they who dwell in your house. They will always be praising you. Happy are the people whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on the pilgrim's way. Those who go through the desolate valley will find it a place of springs, for the early rains have covered it with pools of water. They will climb from height to height, and the God of gods will reveal himself in Zion. Lord God of hosts, hear my prayer. Hearken, O God of Jacob. Behold our defender, O God, and look upon the face of your anointed. For one day in your courts is better than 1,000 in my own room, and to stand at the threshold of the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of the wicked. For the Lord God is both sun and shield. He will give grace and glory. No good thing will the Lord withhold from those who walk with integrity. O Lord of hosts, happy are they who put their trust in you.
Better 1,000 days there than, or one day there than 1,000 days in one's own dwelling. This is going to come around, and there are two hymns, one on the front, one on the back. But I want us to look at the one that starts, "How lovely is thy dwelling place."
Are there any more?
They're coming.
They're coming around.
Should be enough.
I can hum loudly. Anybody else?
Yeah, today.
So the song, you remember the words of that song in the back of your mind, and then this is how it is cast in a hymn fashion. We'll sing it together. Those of you who know it can join with me, and then others just chime in as you can. How lovely is thy dwelling place, O Lord of hosts, to me. My thirsting soul desires and longs within thy courts to me. My very heart and flesh cry out, O living God, for thee. Beside thine altars, gracious Lord, the swallows find a nest. How happy they who dwell with thee and praise thee without rest. And happy they whose hearts are set upon the pilgrim's rest. They who go through the desert vale will find it filled with springs, and they shall climb from height to height till Zion's temple rings. With praise to thee in glory throne, Lord God, great King of kings. One day within thy courts excels 1,000 spent away. How happy they who keep thy laws, nor from thy precepts stray. For thou shalt surely bless all those who live the words they pray. So we can sing the songs of Zion ourselves. During the Reformation times, when the history was, the Psalms were almost always sung in monasteries and sometimes in regular parish churches. But they're not always easy. If you're singing plain song or you're singing some particular setting, you have to practice, you have to be able to read music, you have to be able to be a fairly accomplished musician to sing the Psalms the way they were done in the medieval times. So authors began and poets began trying to recast them into hymnody. Martin Luther was great at that, and there were ones done in the Church of England as well, and all over Reformation Europe. And so we've inherited those in our hymnal, and you'll often see in the subscription to a hymn that this is from Psalm whatever. Some are more, this is pretty accurately translated. I mean, it's almost verse by verse. Some of them are more of a paraphrase of the psalm, but they're really quite lovely, I think, and a way for us to engage that part of our prayer. He who sings prays twice, I think St. Augustine said that, and it's true for us as well. Whether you have a great voice or not, it's good to try. Joyful noise and all that.
Was it done in Latin or in the song?
Well, originally it would have been done in Latin, and of course, and then when Martin Luther translated things into German and the English, College Cranmer and others translated the liturgy into English for us, then it would have been in English. And the Psalms themselves, the Coverdale Psalter, which is the Psalms that are in the 1928 prayer book, they were one of the early translations of the Latin Psalms into English, and beautiful English as well. I sometimes read my daily office out of the old prayer book, not because I like the prayer so much in Elizabethan English, but Coverdale Psalter is hard to beat. It's beautifully done. So, pre-Reformation would have been in Latin, but after the Reformation it began to be translated into a language understanded of the people, be that German or French or English, wherever the Reformation is taking root. Other comments about the psalm itself, the essence of it, before we look at one more?
One of the things I like about it is that there's this extolling of Jerusalem, of Zion. Even there, the sparrow has found her an house, to use Coverdale. The sparrow hath found her an house, and the swallow a place where she may raise her young. That Zion is so all-encompassing that even their birds find their home. It's not just humans, it goes on beyond that. Yeah, it is the bird lover. Even though the sparrow, the other thing is that the sparrow hath found her an house, not a house, an house.
Maybe just an house.
An house, exactly.
Or a mouse.
We think that this,
Dashing the young ones.
Yes,
that's right.
we think this psalm was recited by pilgrims as they made their way to or walked about Jerusalem in their prayer time. Perhaps it was written by one first seeing the temple for the first time, and sort of love bubbles up. James May, in an article on the Psalms in the Interpretation magazine, writes this: every visit to a temple or church or meeting of believers is, in a profound sense, a pilgrimage. We go, not just for practical or personal reasons, we go theologically. Christians have read and sung Psalm 84, and through it praise God, to whom we go in different ways. So the idea of pilgrimage, of course, pilgrimage to Jerusalem, for Muslims, the pilgrimage to Mecca. For Christians, there are a variety of places for us to pilgrimage. We've done it in nature, here in the Altars of the World project. You can pilgrimage to our own cathedral, a pilgrimage to the National Cathedral in Washington, Canterbury. There are lots of places for us that are kind of thin places, and there are places unique to our history, whereas if you go there, you're not a tourist, you're a pilgrim. You're there for a particular purpose. You go to seek God on the journey, and when you arrive there. Canterbury Table, on pilgrimage.
Well, the pilgrimage created 7 crusades.
That's true.
Everybody wanted to get to Jerusalem. How do you get there?
The downside
How
of
do you do it?
the downside of overvaluing a place is you can have wars about it, right?
Well, the Pope said, if you go there, you get to go to heaven.
Exactly.
That's your mate for the trip.
It takes good care of you. Exactly.
I had a question.
Yeah.
So, I see that there's a cadence here, and that speaks not just from the form of music, but also metaphorically about being a journey, stepping forward. And when you were describing the Reformation effect, I made a connection, I don't know if it's accurate, that we used to have these Gregorian chants, and then after the Reformation, it kind of went away, and we went to English, or German, I should say, versus Latin, and more of a hymn, simple. So were those, that movement from Gregorian chants to a hymn, was that associated with the Reformation?
Yeah, I think it was, in the sense that there was a movement in Reformation thinking, which has continued to our very day, that the priest doesn't do everything, that the congregation itself is part of the worshiping community, and so that was part of having the liturgy made in English, so people could not only understand it better, but participate in it verbally. And the idea of having songs that are not just sung by the choir, although you can go to an English cathedral sometimes, St. Paul's Cathedral, you won't sing the songs. You'll sit there and listen to a beautiful boys' choir sing the songs. But the idea is that the language of worship should be in all of our mouths, not only in those of us who are ordained and standing up behind the altar rail. And so I think it was part of that mindset, part of that sort of sensitivity to put the hymns into mouths of people rather than just the choir or the clergy. It's kind of a Reformation sentiment, if you will, that the church is the people of God, not only those of us who wear funny-looking hats and clothes and such as that.
Only some of us wear funny.
I know.
Speak for yourself. My hats are not funny.
All right. Rather than read the last psalm, we have to stop, but Psalm 87 is the one that we're going to be looking at, but I want to do it as the hymn on the flip side of the page. The structure of Psalm 87 has been sort of debated, but it's a song that all people are God's people. So we're following up on our previous discussion. Jerusalem is a sacred place for Jews, Christians, Muslims. Sadly, we've often seen ourselves as enemies instead of seeing that Jerusalem symbolizes a God who welcomes and claims all people and all nations. The psalm is sometimes used as a baptismal psalm. It's used on Pentecost. And John Newton wrote this hymn, which is based on the song, Glorious Things of Thee Are Spoken. And we're going to conclude with that. On the flip side, verses 1 through 4, the flip side of your sheet.
Glorious things of thee are spoken, Zion, city of our God. He whose word cannot be broken, for me, for his own abode. On the rock of ages founded, what can shake thy sure repose? With salvation's walls surrounded, then we smile at all thy foes. See the streams of living water, pouring from eternal love. Well supply thy sons and daughters, and all fear of want remove. Who can faint while such a river ever flows their thirst to assuage? Waves which wipe the world of giver, never fails from age to age. Round each habitation hovering, see the cloud and fire appear. For our glory and our covering, showing that the Lord is near. Thus they march the pillar leading, light by night and shade by day. Daily on the manna feeding, which he gives them when they pray. Save your sins of Zion city, I through grace a member am. Let the world deride or pity, I will glorify my name. Fame is the world's best pleasure, all its boasts
see, this hymn takes it to the larger picture. Not only the Zion's children are the Jews, as the psalmist would have it, but yet Zion's children are broader than that. And at its best, the Jewish people believe that as well, that ultimately that they were chosen for a mission to the broader world, not only chosen for privilege at their worst. They sort of narrowed that focus down, that they were the chosen ones and nobody else. Christians do the same thing. So your homework is to compare this we just sung with the actual psalm text in your Bibles and see how it's changed or how it's similar.
This melody sounded so familiar.
Deutschland,
Is it
You'll notice that the tune name is Austrian.
That's right.
This is that particular one. There are some of those hymns that were very German, that had very German names. When they made it in 1940, they changed the names so that they didn't look so German.
Absolutely.
Reich and all things like that.
Like my grandfather changed his name from K to C, Carl. Well, thank you. My apologies in advance for next week. I'm going to be out of town. I was a bishop visitor for a community of Episcopal nuns in Cincinnati, the community of the Transfiguration, and they're celebrating their 125th anniversary as a community, and they asked me to come and be a part of that. So I'll be in Cincinnati next week, but thinking of you, and sorry to miss. I think Gary's on next
Yeah,
week.
we will be doing Thanksgiving, so that's Thanksgiving.
I'm not boycotting Gary. I'm going to do some ministry. Thank you.
Don't forget the Psalms books, so
Psalms
you get
books
from
are
our
here.
library. Yeah.
Thank you, my friend.
It's a theological journal, like